Hello and welcome to Ahead of the Curve. This is your host, Jonathan Gelner, and thank you so much for joining us today. This podcast is powered by Stick and Ball TV, the baseball and softball streaming platform. If you're a coach and you're looking for a resource to help you get better, then Stick and Ball is just for you. With weekly updated videos from some of the best baseball and softball coaches in the country, it's a no-brainer. Check them out at stickandball.tv or on the Stick and Ball TV mobile app. On today's show, we have on part 2 with Tom Marker, head baseball coach at Olentangy Orange High School. In this episode, we discuss what they do for preseason, how to train in game-like environments, and in-game data they track. You're going to love this episode with Tom Marker. So when do you guys, you said you had tryouts in February. Is that when you start your preseason stuff and your actual preparing for in-season?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's when we start our team stuff. So the 6-player workouts really help us in terms of individual training. But when we have our tryouts in February, everybody does them differently. You know, you can hold tryouts as long as you want to have tryouts. For us, it's a 3-day period. And then we name teams, and then we get into our team training. Because we open up the last weekend in March. It's usually the first day that we're allowed to play games. So we have about a month to prepare for those first games from a team standpoint. You know, we can still throw bullpens and we can still have hitting sessions and do all those things in the 6-player workouts. But as far as, you know, whatever you want to do from a team concept, that doesn't happen until, you know, basically the month of March is really your lead up. So that's what I would deem preseason. But at that point, when we get into March, our guys have been throwing bullpens probably since January. You know, catchers been doing their training, hitters have been doing their training and things along those lines. But as far as the team concept, yeah, that happens in February after tryouts.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit about, you know, what your, whenever you are able to, you know, open it up rather for the individual work. Now you're getting ready for team practice. How do you open up? What does your first month look like? What are you really focusing on? I know you mentioned getting arms ready, which is probably the most important thing we do, but what else?
Yeah, I would think it's almost as much for coaches as it is for players. We're just trying to find a way to blend the group, and you bring in your newcomers and you have your returning guys, and just trying to find a way to get the best team on the field, and then also finding out how those complementary players help out in different aspects. I think it's a real eye-opening period of time. I think the pace in which we train, because a lot of times in Ohio you're inside, and so your indoor team sessions don't look like a traditional team setting. It's not your on-field BP and your cuts and relays and things along those lines. So you have to be really strategic. For us, it's probably a little bit longer in the classroom and a little bit less time actually doing the drills and skills until we can get outside. Now, we do have turf going in right now, and so hopefully that allows us to get outside a little bit sooner. But I would say, we don't do bunt defenses. We don't do first and third defenses. I know a lot of people say, you know, I spend this much time on bunt defense. We didn't work on bunt defenses once the last 2 years. Same with first and third. First and third is maybe a couple of days here and there, sporadic, but we have a way that we train those situations, but it's not a blocked off period of time for bunt defenses and first and thirds and first and third offense and things like that. We're a little bit vanilla in that regard, but I think it's helped us kind of keep it a little bit more simple. But it's a lot of competition. We do live bullpens at that time where we're throwing against hitters, and then we're tracking certain things and looking for, ways to get our program in a position to play at the end of March. So for this year, you know, we're heading down to play. I think you had Jeff Sherman on the call at Marcus High School. We're going down to play Marcus High School, McKinney Boyd, playing 3 games down in Texas. And so those guys will be outside. And so we're looking for a way to close the gap on some really, really good teams while we're training inside and they're probably playing games outside. So
nice, no doubt.
But the team's just different. It's just different because when you're inside, it's not as much of a team training.
Sure. No doubt. So you did I think it was a Barnstormers clinic over optimal training environments. So dig into that a little bit. I'd love to hear. I didn't get a chance to listen to it yet, but just what you talked about. What are some ways that we can, you know, steal reps and make training game-like?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have probably beat it to death, the zoo tiger and the jungle tiger, and I think everybody's heard that many, many times. For us, it's just we're trying to create an environment that's most game-like as possible. And so for me, being a math background and data analytics and things like that, I think you have to really look at everything from how high and how far back you set up to your machine to what spin it has, to what's your desired result on the given day. So for instance, to me, like I would love to talk to people who still love teas. Not that again, teas are good for some things, but I think people think they're good for things that they're really not. So for us, it's sitting down and saying, okay, what's the desired result of the training session? And then how do we put our guys in a position to struggle and also to grow? So for us, like for instance, maybe we're going to train, 85 to 90 on the outer third with get me over breaking balls. And so I'll send out the practice or the training plan to our assistant coaches in the morning. I'll say, okay, this is what the segments look like. Do you see any errors there? And then I also think it's really important how you group guys in an indoor training environment. Because for us, it's not just developing the baseball piece. So for instance, we're so detailed in the sense that if we're going to go inside and hit, and let's just say we're going to have 4 guys in a group and they're going to be hitting get me over breaking balls, and then the next one over is fastballs away, just for instance, off a machine. It's so important who we group with who. So we may be grouping 2 guys together because they never talk. We never see them communicating together, so it's important that they're together. Or we may be grouping left-handed hitters together so we don't have to move the machine, and then we'll start them on the last machine. We'll start them on the next to last machine where the last machine is the one that we have to move or whatever. So we're just trying to create a plan that is orchestrated such that there's very little downtime and that every single thing that they're doing there is for growth. And so we used to be hitting stations, and I think people still do that, where they would say, okay, well, we have 16 guys. That means we need to have 8 stations so we can have 2 guys in a group. And so let's do high tee here and front toss here and this there. You're doing a lot of drills that don't mimic anything game-like. And so that's one thing I've been really reading about and really trying to understand is, like, how do you make the most game-like environment in your training? So that's, to me, the most important thing out of anything is make it as game-like as possible.
No doubt. You mentioned the taking out the tee or limiting some of the use or making it more applicable to what you're doing, rather, achievement rather than activity. Were there any other things that come to mind that you're like, yeah, we switched from this to this, and that was, either a big deal for us or it was something that goes against traditional norms?
We got away from front toss a lot, just because the angle in which the pitch comes in.
Just underhand?
Yeah, I'm kind of against it a little bit unless it's really done properly. I think coaches can do it a little better than kids because sometimes kids lose the focus and the importance of how you deliver that pitch. So we've done more overhand front toss and seated in a chair. I know depending on the pitcher we're going to see, but we'll set up like machines in our facility, and then the night before, the morning before, our coaches will go in with Rapsodos and set those up to see what the spin is and what the like the arm angle, like where the release point is and things, and try to match it to the pitcher. And people will say, well, that's overkill. But it may be, but to me, it's getting closer and closer to the game-like environment. Now, we don't talk to our kids about, hey, this spin rate is this and this. No, but we're going to use as much data as we can to create the most live game-like situation. So like even in BP, so when we were throwing BP last year, we set a gun on our BP pitching coach and just said, okay, he's throwing this hard routinely from this distance, and that replicates this mile an hour. So he needs to move to this spot. Or, you'll talk about a BP pitcher that only throws strikes. Well, that's not good. Like you've got to throw balls. Or we've mixed hard softs into our ball carts, and so that we can purposely bean guys during BP so that they can get used to it, because it looks just like a game ball, right? And so if there's any flinch there, the round's over because it's not going to hurt them, but they have to learn how to properly wear a pitch and then also how to stand their ground and drive baseballs opposite field or, whatever the case may be. So I just think,
I like that.
Again, just trying innovative ways to make it as game-like as possible.
You did I don't know if it was a research project or you did some research over hit by pitches and win percentage. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I was at Bexley, which is a Division II school in this area, we had a smaller size team, some young guys, a bunch of sophomores. We didn't swing it real well, and I didn't feel like we held our ground on breaking balls. And so myself and one of our assistant coaches, Eric Williams, kind of looked into just some teams that have had some success in turning programs around. And the two we came to were Vanderbilt and Campbell University. And what happened was their hit by pitch totals had gone up tremendously. Like, for instance, trying to think what it was with Campbell. Campbell was like, they had a losing season and they were at like 46 hit by pitches. They had a losing season, they were at 52 hit by pitches. Then they had a winning season, they were at 117 hit by pitches. They haven't been below 100 hit by pitches since then. They led the nation in hit by pitches last year. And if you correlate like hit by pitches and batting average, so for instance, the team that had the least amount of hit by pitches last year had the lowest batting average and also won 0 games. Now, again, they played less games, but they won 0 games. Campbell, who's in the top 10 of hit by pitches, is also in the top 10 of runs produced and also in the top 10 of batting average. Vanderbilt was another one I looked at because Vandy, like in 2000, I think it was like they went from 69 to 124 from like 2009 to 2010. And so their ability to wear pitches. Now, again, somebody goes, well, it's not because they're wearing pitches that they have a higher batting average. I disagree. I think it has a definite effect. But if you think about it, the higher velocity arms usually are arm side run guys. And so if they're arm side run with less control and you take away the inner third of the plate, now you can look middle away. And also it's easier to hit 95 on the outer half than it is 95 on the inner half. So, yeah, we just started to look at hit by pitches and the value of those and finding ways to get on base, but also finding ways to hit the breaking ball effectively, finding ways to hold your ground and really drive the ball to the backside. So, I mean, there's just like if Campbell's a really good case study for anybody looking at hit by pitches. I think they're one of them. Southeast Louisiana is really good at wearing pitches, but I even looked at – I was talking to one of my buddies who's an assistant coach, and I won't bring up the school, but he said, where were we at? And I said, well, you were 173rd in hit by pitches. You were 184th in batting average and 181st in runs scored. So they're pretty well correlated. And people talk about correlation versus causation, and I don't want to get into all that, but I would say that they definitely – the ability to wear a pitch does play a factor in your ability to score runs and your ability to raise your batting average.
No doubt. I think even – I never thought about staying in on a breaking ball and how that flinching on a curveball can affect that. And so I think that's something else that I'm writing down over here of, hey man, it's like, especially with high school with the big loopy curveball things, with righties too. I think that's something that is probably undervalued with some in-game data though. I think that this is interesting. So I saw that you were on a podcast with Trey Cobb maybe earlier this year. And you talked with him about in-game data like quite a bit. So this is something that I would really like to dig more into because it's an area that I would like to get better at for sure. So we talk about quabs and what does that mean to you? How are you teaching it? But also, what are some different things that you're looking to increase your chances of winning, like the hit by pitches? I think that's a great example. So do you have any more other examples of like that, of what you're looking, tracking, trying to get them to understand and just essentially what data have you found that people aren't talking about enough that's helping you guys to win games?
I would say first pitch swing percentage is important. First pitch strike swing percentage is one that I would really look at, like how often you take a pitch, first pitch strike, I think is a big thing. I think catching barrels. So did you barrel a ball or not? And I know people say, well, that counts as a QAB, and for some it does, but I think that's a vitally important one. For us, we have a tendency, and I think high school across the board has a tendency to take pitches that are first pitch fastball away. And I don't remember what year I tracked it, but the teams that we saw threw 87% first pitch fastball away. And that was probably the pitch that we took the most. So like, even if you think about you calling pitches or your catcher calls pitches, first pitch of the game, he's going fastball away, right? Like 95% of the time. And so I think your swing percentage, and then also how often you take that pitch. We talked to our leadoff and our 2-hole hitter last year, and we thought about flipping them. Both really good players. Both are D1 commits. One's actually playing Division I baseball right now, and the other one's a senior this year. He'll be going to Vanderbilt next year. But we talked to him because our leadoff hitter was swinging at a ton of first pitches. I mean, a ton. And everybody says, well, leadoff hitter should work to count and this and that. And we always told him, if you get a first pitch fastball, go ahead and jump. I mean, he has power, but he can fly. He set the record for triples, and he's just a really good hitter. And then our 2-hole was seeing a lot of off-speed pitches. Again, being a Vanderbilt commit, I think a lot of people knew that going in. And so he was taking pitches early in counts, and he was again, probably because I did a poor job of communicating, but he once said to me, he said, I didn't think I was supposed to swing at first pitch curveballs. You'll hear people say, well, don't swing at curveballs until you get 2 strikes. And if you're a Vanderbilt commit, you're going to see first pitch curveball, probably second pitch curveball, and some of those are just going to be getting you overs, and you got to jump them. So just looking at like how often he swings and in what count he swings and what count he gets certain pitches, and having conversations about what are you hunting in certain spots and things along those lines. But I think in-game data, just knowing what you're hunting and what you're hitting and what kind of pitches you're taking, I think is really valuable for players, and having that behind the backstop view video tells a lot. So I think that one's big.
But before you go to the next one or the next few, which I'm sure we could do an entire podcast over that, how are you teaching it? So you're having these conversations, and I've talked to a few people about, maybe even, how do we track swing decisions without we have a flight scope, but half the time it's not ideal. And so, what are some ways that you found to be able to teach that along with your game-like environments, but like taking that piece from the game, having them even reflect upon it, or having them do some sort of exercise with their swing decisions? And I would really like to hear your thoughts on it, or even do you guys?
Yeah, no, we've done a few things, and some have been successful, some haven't. So I have like a Google sheet that I created where and there are 2 that are formatted such that if you type results in one sheet, it goes to the next tab over, and it'll categorize those into the 9 hitting zones and what your swing percentage is. And then the next tab over will calculate based off of your exit velocity and your average exit velocity, were you above or below, and then it'll highlight that 9 hitting zone based on the pitches that you swung at, how many did you hit within a certain range of that exit velocity. But we use that more so for us than we do with the kids. I think some of that will be data overload. So we use that more so with like how we're going to create the training environment the next day, or the conversations we're going to have. Probably got to give our kids a little bit more ownership over it. We talk to them about it, but that's where the classroom comes back in the next day. So a lot of times this past year, we would watch the film the night after the game, and then come in with a few clips and talk to kids about, a kid may say, well, that fastball, it was way outside. And then when you show the clip, they're like, man, maybe it wasn't. But if they were to tell me I was sitting middle in, I felt like it was too far outside, then that's a good answer, because when you sit middle in, a pitch on the outer third seems like it's a mile away. Sure. But I just think, again, it goes back to having those conversations about what are you hunting? And if they say I'm sitting middle away, but that pitch was off. Well, if you're sitting middle away, a pitch 1 or 2 balls off is still a ball that you can absolutely hammer. And then as far as training it too, I think we do some things where, like, even during fall ball games, if you throw a first pitch strike, it counts. You go to 0-2. If you take a first pitch strike, it's 0-2. If the pitcher throws a first pitch ball, it goes to 2-0. So it just hones in on the importance of throwing strikes and then also swinging at strikes in the zone. But we've trained it some different ways. I think another way too is to train like bad ball swings. So for us, like if you do flips or side flips and flip them out of the zone, but show a kid that, like, if you catch a barrel, you're still going to square it up and hit it pretty well. It doesn't have to be over the 17-inch plate in order for you to drive it. So,
right. No doubt. That's cool. Well, with that, I think that's really neat. And one of the things that you mentioned was the more you swing, the more you walk, which I think that's an interesting comment. And it's contrary to the Oakland A's of taking a ton of different pitches. They're also seeing big league guys. They're not seeing high school kids that we see. Is that still truthful to you? Is that still something that you believe in?
Yeah, I think again, it depends on the team you're going to face and the pitcher and things along those lines. But sure, I know when we played Jonathan Alder, one of my buddies, the head coach Jonathan Alder, does a phenomenal job. And when they were really playing their best baseball a few years back, they were first pitch aggressive. and they were so aggressive that teams would want to nibble. They'd want to throw that first pitch curveball or the first pitch fastball off the plate. Now they're 1-0 because they knew how aggressive they were. So I think the more aggressive you are, it makes pitchers nibble more. It makes pitching coaches get a little bit more nervous about what they're calling in certain counts. So yeah, I think it could lead to that. It depends on the team you're playing and what your report says. But absolutely, I think anytime you're aggressive, anytime that you can change or you can speed up the heart rate or the style of play of your opponent based on what you're doing, I think it's huge. Like being able to play offense on defense, right? Like you got to move. Mm-hmm. You got to move. And so,
well, that's cool.
I think it does.
So with a Gamelike training environment, I've only got a couple questions left for you, but thinking about in-season practice advice. So this time of year, this will be part 2 of our series, but you got coaches out there that are listening that are going through their first season, and either thinking back or thinking about those guys. What are some ways that you found during the season, which, here in Oklahoma, we could play 2 or 3 games a week, or we could play 5. I remember when I was in Texas, we played, twice a week, most weeks, which is a completely different environment. Whenever you're doing that, you have more days off, you have more time to do things. But I would love to hear your advice for how to efficiently run practice during a season, managing energy and different things like that. So keeping those, the first year head coaches in mind who are curious, what would you tell them?
I'd start by saying, don't think you have to practice for 4 hours. I mean, I think being efficient, being very detailed, and then also trying to get you could say kill 2 birds with 1 stone type of idea or type of plan. So for instance, if I'm going to do on-field BP, it's not simply on-field BP, it's defensive on-field BP mixed in with base running, like the Monty Lee type stuff that he talks about in terms of on-field BP. I think that's vitally important. I think utilizing your time as wisely as possible and valuing your players' time in terms of, they need to get home and do homework and they need other things to do. So when they're at the baseball field, they need to feel like there's value in every single minute. When we get into season, our schedule is usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then a single or a doubleheader on a Saturday. So the way we train is usually Tuesday is going to be a heavy training day, maybe some scouting report type stuff. And then we work in a period every day in our training based on a team within our league that we think we need to prepare for. So for instance, if you were a football coach and Navy was in your conference, which they're not in a conference, but if they were in your conference, you would have an option period in your training, right? Every single day you'd have an option period, even if you weren't playing them that week. And that's kind of how we train on Tuesday. So we think about okay, this is and again, I'm not going to go into what team it is, but there's a team in our league that we call it that period. And we train our Tuesday very hard. When we get to Thursday, we call it a PD day. And so usually on Thursdays, it's professional development. And what we do is we open up our facilities from after school until about 5 o'clock. So about a 2-hour window roughly. And we just tell kids to come in and get the work in that they need to get in. So it's their personal development. So a kid may come in and say, I'm gonna long toss today, and coach, I want to take some ground balls on the field, or coach, I want to hit some I'm gonna hit off the machine, and then I'm gonna foam roll, and I'm out of here. Another guy may say, I'm just gonna check in and load the machine for Billy while he hits, or whatever the case may be. So Thursday's professional development or personal development day, we just call it PD. And then some kids may say, I'm going to hang out with my girlfriend. And that's fine too. That's whatever your personal development is that day on that Thursday, you're going to do it. Now, what do the majority of our guys do? They come in and train. They come in, our number one arm would come in and do his plyo wall stuff. And he was also our 3-hole hitter, and he might take about 6 to 7 swings and call it a day. But I think that check-in piece and giving them some ownership over it is very important. And then Sundays we usually use for a weight room day. Or, again, if they have church that day or they have family things, by all means, they go do that. But we also open up the facilities on Sundays as well for them to come in and get some work in. But when we get into season, it's usually Tuesday's our big heavy day, and then, play Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
I love it. The last one I've got before we, get to the resources and wrap this thing up, which number one, I'm writing down some copious notes here because I really think that you're doing some really cool stuff. with the scouting piece, how do you do that with other teams? You've talked about, preparing for different teams in your league. How do you go about that? Especially being a head coach, you're usually playing most of the days that the other teams that you're trying to play against are playing. So how do you go about scouting other teams?
There's so many ways to go about it. I think about it like poker tells, right? And so if I know, so summertime's big for me, and I just try to go watch pitchers a bunch in the summer and just try to see how or why, or if they even, what do they do that tips pitches? Do they have tendencies? There's so many ways to know what pitches they're going to throw or prior to even the first movement of their body. I think that's important. I think scouting lower levels. So like if I were a football coach, I would go to every JV and freshman game and just scout the other team. Now, again, with football, you can't, at least in Ohio, the freshmen and JVs play after the varsity. But in baseball, if you can go to a JV or freshman game and watch them, you can scout a freshman or JV game to get information about the varsity game, because a lot of times freshmen and JV coaches are more verbal. So like if they miss a sign, they'll say, you didn't see me do this, or you didn't see me do this. And so they'll tip the signs that way. Or if they run certain team defenses or bunt defenses or things along those lines, they'll show those in situations that you may not see them in a varsity game. So I think that's really, really important. But I think about like from a bird's eye view of tells, and then in-game scouting too, because I think you can watch movements and mannerisms of players during a game and they tip off certain things. So that's really important too. Like I think like a lot of times when I scout in the summer, I'll watch catchers too, because I feel like catchers give away pitches more than anybody on the field, more than a coach signaling in or a pitcher. I think a catcher will give you pitches. So for instance, it was 2018, we were getting ready to go play a team, and so we get about a week off before the tournament comes. And so I went and watched this team play twice. And then I traded some huddle film, and I thought about some things, and I watched this catcher, and he tipped every pitch, every single time, tipped the pitch away. So I think that's important too, is just the ability to watch and look for tells. And then lastly, I think it's just trying to find low hanging fruit, like where you can have an edge. For instance, looking at statistics. So, played a team last year in the playoffs or in the tournament where the pitcher they were throwing hit a lot of people, so had a lot of hit by pitches. So for us, that game was even more so a game in which we needed to hold our ground and just talk about the importance of staying on a plate, driving the ball backside, and knowing that the fastball is going to run. So if it starts in, it's going to run in. Curveball is going to back up at times, and those type of things. So I just think being really intentional about what you're looking for, and looking for tells, almost like you're playing poker.
Man, I love hearing that. And, I would even, without giving too much about what we do away, social media is also a resource that you can go in and you can find stuff like that, since every tournament that they play in is now posting all kinds of videos about them. And, that's the only reason teenagers are on it now, to retweet that stuff. So you could go and find stuff like that. But
that's PBR as well, because you can get all the film on your arms and chop up that film and watch it. And I mean, there's so many resources out there. I mean, it's wild. Games are on YouTube, So yeah,
that's cool. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
So I guess the last question, and I'm going to call it the legacy question, but if you had any advice or a resource or just anything and everything in general for the young coaches, the young crowd, you're thinking first year, first couple of years, what would you leave them with to help them to continue to grow their career and to grow the next generation? So it could be, books or conferences or advice or quotes, whatever you got. But if you have one chance to give them something, what would that be?
I would say two things. Like I'm addicted to Twitter, and I think people laugh about it and say, you need to get off Twitter. I think read as much as you possibly can and then learn how to filter. And so for me, Twitter's a huge avenue for that. And I read a ton on there, and I'm on there constantly reading about math, reading about baseball, and just being able to filter that information. But I also think reach out to as many people as you possibly can and connect with as many as you can. So like for me, baseball has been huge in the friendships I've made. I've got Matt Ittner down at Cox High School in Virginia, who's just an unbelievable individual. I've got, I talked to Butch Chaffin, or I talked to Sherman out in Texas, or, I can go on and on about the guys, even the ones that within our own area. But I think just sharing ideas and bouncing ideas off of each other, and trying to learn from that. And then also, like I said, about the filter piece, it's so important to take it as much as you can, but also don't try to use everything that you come across. Like every single, book you read isn't going to go directly into your program. Like being able to filter and take away what you want to use and things along those lines. I think that's important. And then lastly, I think with the new coaches, everybody talks about how tough parents are. Our parents are awesome. They really are. And I think for you as an individual, whether you're a teacher or a coach, I think you just got to think about not trying to please everybody. The most important people to please are your players and your students. Like those are the ones that are important. But I also think, like, if you take a quote, if you think about, like, you should never ever worry about the criticism of those that you wouldn't ask advice from. So if I'm not asking you for advice, then I'm not going to be overly upset by your criticism. And so I think that's important. But just lock into the people around you, share ideas, try to connect with as many people as you can. Like you mentioned Mike Deegan. Mike Deegan might be the most, the best human around, and he just happens to be a baseball coach. And he's a huge resource for myself. And we're lucky in the baseball community to have just some rock star people. Greg Beals at Ohio State is always willing to help out our organization, our high school organization. He's right here at the Ohio State University. But just connect with as many people as you can and keep trying to grow as an individual. And then I think that'll in turn grow your program.
Thank you for listening to Ahead of the Curve. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review wherever you are listening. I also wanted to remind you that you can find the video portion at the AOTC channel on stickandball.tv. Have a great week.